Hi guys, and welcome back to the garage, and another disembodied voice video I'm afraid, but there you go. Now I've been looking for some time for a period road test of Shovelhead in UK magazines to see what the press thought of them at the time, and I haven't found anything so far from the mid-70s. I found some 1340 bigger engined shovels, later shovels, until I found this old copy of Bike in the loft a few days ago. And this is the August 1975 issue, in which there is a giant test between a fully dressed Electric Glide and a Motor Guzzi T3 Californian, and the test was carried out by Bill Haylock. Now the Harley was originally going to be loaned out by AMF Europe, but that deal fell through, which frankly seems to be a recurring problem in Bike magazine at this time. They seem to not have bikes turn up quite regularly, but anyway. This particular Electric Glide was privately owned, and it was owned by the chairman of the Harley Riders Club at the time, who actually joined Bill on an extended road test where they ran down from Peterborough to Cornwall to find out how the bikes would go. Now the bike was registered in April 73, and we should discover at the end of the video how I know that, and had cost its owner the princely sum of £2,200, a lot of money. And to put it into some sort of perspective, you could have bought 10 CZ125s for the same amount of cash, or 2 Norton 850 Mark III Commandos. The Californian, which is up against, sold new for £1,700 at the time. So the Harley was a very expensive motorcycle. The new owner had obviously decided he didn't like the original paint scheme, because despite being 2 years old, it had been resprayed in a non-standard black and white scheme, which was a very good thing according to Bill, as he used the words yuck and gimmicky when he described the original candy colours, which is very much a matter of taste, as I personally love my candy purple shovel, but each to their own. So the exhaust note was appreciated, and he said added to a sense of arrogance when piloting the Glide through the streets of London. His presence on the road drew envious glances from onlookers, and every time he stopped, people would gather around it asking questions about how fast it would go, etc., etc. But Bill said the novelty for this soon wore off, especially as the older generation who chatted seemed obsessed by how much the bike had cost, and how they could have bought 2 cars for the same amount of money. This image was mentioned again before delving into the real road test, and the unwanted attention that the bike drew from the boys in blue, which included the owner John being fined for no front number plate a couple of days before the law changed, which removed the need for the front number plate at all, which seems a rather petty prosecution to me, but there you go. However, having said that, he'd also been banned for 3 months for riding the Harley while leaning back in the seat without his hands on the bars, so hey-ho. Anyway, after another couple of anecdotes, Bill got down to discussing the bike itself in some more detail. The first issue they had problems with was a slipping clutch due to oil building up in the primary case, made worse by lots of town riding. The Harley's ability as a long-distance bike was prefaced by reflecting on the marketing hype used by Harley at the time, describing it as the king of the road. But the reality of a long ride down the M3 caused the Glide a lot more problems than the accompanying Guzzi. A brief stop at Salisbury found the hydraulic tappets rattling away merrily, which was put down to the fact that the cast iron cylinders had got very, very hot while running through London, and then hitting the motorway hadn't helped cool them that much either. However, having said that, just as a side issue, I personally can't imagine my old shuffle being able to hold 70 miles an hour anywhere, let alone for miles down the motorway. But anyway, that's fine. A short rest to let the bike cool down and for the oil to regain some semblance of viscosity, and normal service was resumed, and off they went again. Bill admitted approaching the Glide with some fear and trepidation, which was a combination of its weight, which is a lot, and the fact it was privately owned and the owner was standing there watching it. The riding position he described as weird, and when he was seated on the bike it felt massive. The throttle cable had too much slack, and the lack of a return spring he found extremely disconcerting. Both these issues were addressed later in '73, though, as my bike has got a return spring, although it's got an SNS carb, which may make the difference, and it's slack free. But anyway. On the road, the bike was described as heavy and ponderous, making the Gutsy feel like a lightweight. Progress was fine, as the engine was meaty, but the box was clunky and slow. The seat spring was undamped and bouncy, and the bike was described as cornering like a kangaroo on speed, which seems rather unfair. Further use saw more praise for the engine and its torque, but trying to wipe off the speed that was gained was another matter. The brakes were inadequate for the weight, with the front being described as being both weak and grabby at the same time, although a brake bleed after the test apparently helped. The rear disc setup was described as wholly inadequate. The banana caliper pin wear was already being described, although on the back in this case rather than the front, but either way still being described, which is really rather pathetic, as the discs had only arrived a couple of years earlier. So excessive wear of mounting pins in a couple of years is dreadful, really. And if anyone's interested, there is a video of mine in my playlist showing what I had to do to the pin on the front to address the really quite atrocious amount of slop. The handling was described as being better than expected, although the footboards grounded very easily. But Bill decided that once you'd actually worked up the nerve to throw it into the bends, it could actually be hustled along at a fair rate. There's not really much else in the article. A lot of it is peripheral to describing the bike itself. So I'll just skip to what I take as being really the summary paragraph, and I'll quote directly here. I had to come to the conclusion that the FLH is a pig. It is so damn heavy that should it fall off its stand, you will need to call out a mobile crane. The controls are awkward, the steering is heavy, and the brakes are lethal. But having ridden a Superglide and a Sportster, and having spoken to Harley owners, I also realised that it's pointless judging a Harley by conventional standards. End of quote. So, all in all, an interesting test. I'm glad I found it, and one that probably explains why sales were so low in the UK at this time. I think the criticisms that Bill raises are perfectly reasonable, as I've had similar experiences with my old shovel, although thankfully not the overheating business, as I think I'd be really quite worried about that. But anyway, I think the final quote, or the final bit of the quote, is the most telling. The Glide has a character that doesn't stand up to rational analysis, in his opinion, or mine. It was a classic bike, even when it was a current model, really, and would only appeal to the type of rider willing to accept its limitations in the first place. Similar in many ways to the last of the line of British bikes, which were outdated, undeniably outdated, but with a character that was missing in the modern bikes that had come to replace them. The final interesting thing about this test is that I ran the number plate through the DVLA checker, and the bike is still around and is currently taxed. Thanks for watching. Have a look at my Shovelhead videos if you haven't seen them already, and please call back to the garage where you'll get more stuff by an outdated bloke talking about outdated bikes and cars. Thanks a lot.